The lantern flame danced against cracked adobe walls as Eleanor Briggs pulled thread through torn fabric. Her fingers moved without thought, muscle memory from 1,000 nights like this one. Outside, wind scraped across Dust Haven like something hungry, searching for weakness in every board and shutter. She didn't look up when the gust hit. The candle beside her flickered but held. 37 years old, and her hands already looked 50. The needle caught on a callus, slipped, and found its path again. Across the single room, two small shapes breathed under a threadbare quilt. Her children. Asleep, but not peaceful. The boy had whimpered earlier, holding his stomach. Eleanor had given him water and told him morning would bring something better. The lie came easily now. The shirt in her lap belonged to Samuel Cord, the blacksmith. He'd pay her in cornmeal if she finished by dawn. Maybe a half-pound. Enough for thin porridge if she stretched it with extra water. Her daughter wouldn't complain. The child never did anymore. Eleanor set another stitch. Then another. The rhythm kept her thoughts from wandering into dangerous territory, into memories of a husband who died under a collapsed mine shaft, into the slow realization that no one in Dust Haven would help a woman who had nothing left to trade. The wind outside grew teeth. She paused, needle suspended, and listened. Something had changed in the air. Not just wind now. Something thicker. Heavier. The kind of weather that buried livestock and stripped paint from wood. Eleanor stood and moved to the window. Through the warped glass, she saw it, a wall of dust rolling toward the settlement like the end of something. It blotted out the stars, turned the horizon into a bruise. She crossed to her children and laid a hand on each head. Still sleeping. Let them stay that way as long as possible. The first real blast hit the house with a sound like a fist. The walls groaned. Dust found its way through every crack, drifting down from the ceiling in thin curtains. Eleanor pressed rags against the window frame and door gap, working quickly, methodically. She'd survived storms before. You didn't fight them. You just made yourself smaller and waited. She returned to her chair and picked up the needle again. The blacksmith's shirt. The cornmeal. Morning. But the storm had other intentions. It howled now, a living thing throwing itself against Dust Haven. Eleanor's candle guttered and went out. She sat in darkness, thread still pinched between her fingers, listening to the wood of her small home bend and creak. Then, something else. A sound that didn't belong to wind or dust or battered timber. Eleanor's head turned toward the door. She held her breath, straining to hear past the storm's rage. There it was again. Faint. Human. A cry. She stood slowly, every instinct screaming at her to stay inside, to keep her children safe, to let the storm take whatever it wanted as long as it wasn't them. But the cry came again. Shorter this time. Weaker. Eleanor looked at her sleeping children. Looked at the door. Her hand found the lantern in the dark, found the matches beside it. 1 strike. 2. The flame caught. She moved to the door and wrapped her fingers around the handle. The wood vibrated under her palm from the wind's assault. Everything in her knew this was foolish. Everything in her knew that opening this door could let the storm devour what little she had left. But someone was out there. And Eleanor Briggs had already lost too much to ignore the sound of someone losing everything. She pulled the door open, and the storm came screaming in. The dust hit her face like 1,000 tiny blades. Eleanor squinted into the chaos, lantern held high, its light swallowed almost immediately by the churning brown air. She couldn't see 3 feet beyond her doorway. Hello. Her voice disappeared into the wind. She stepped onto the porch, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other extending the lantern forward. Sand stung her cheeks. Her dress whipped against her legs. The world had become nothing but noise and darkness, and the terrible weight of air thick with earth. Then, movement. Low to the ground. A shape. Eleanor dropped to her knees, setting the lantern down, reaching forward with both hands. Her fingers found fabric. Small shoulders. A child. She pulled, and the boy came forward, coughing violently, his small body convulsing with each breath. His eyes were squeezed shut against the dust, tears cutting clean lines down his dirt-caked face. "It's all right," Eleanor said, though he probably couldn't hear her. "I've got you." But he was pulling back, twisting in her grip, reaching behind him into the storm. His mouth opened, she saw him screaming, though she heard nothing, and his hand stretched desperately toward something Eleanor couldn't see. She understood. Keeping one hand locked on the boy's shoulder, Eleanor reached past him into the blinding dust. Her arm swept through nothing. Nothing. Then her fingers brushed cloth. She grabbed and pulled. A woman emerged from the darkness, bent nearly double, one hand clutching at her chest, the other stretched toward the boy. She was older, her gray hair plastered against her skull, her expression not frightened but confused, deeply, disturbingly confused. Her eyes held no recognition of the danger surrounding them. Eleanor hooked her arm around the woman's waist and hauled both of them toward the door. The boy found his feet and pushed from behind, helping the woman stumble forward. Together they crossed the threshold, and Eleanor kicked the door shut with her heel. Silence crashed over them, relative silence. The storm still hammered outside, but the walls held it at bay. Eleanor bolted the door and turned. The boy was on his knees beside the woman, his small hands on her face. "Grandmother," he said. "Grandmother, we're inside now. We're safe." The woman blinked at him. Her lips moved but formed no words. She looked around the room as if seeing it from underwater, distant, unreachable. Eleanor's children had woken. They sat up in bed, wide-eyed, watching the strangers. "Stay there," Eleanor told them softly. She moved to the boy and the woman, crouching beside them. The boy's face was a mess of mud and tears, but his eyes were sharp. Terrified, but sharp. "You're safe now," Eleanor said. "Can you tell me your name?" "Caleb." His voice was hoarse from the dust. "This is my grandmother. Ruth." Eleanor looked at Ruth. The woman's gaze had drifted to the ceiling. She was humming something, a tune that didn't quite hold together. "All right, Caleb. Let's get you both warm." She stood and moved to her small stove, coaxing life back into the coals. Her mind worked quickly. She had half a pot of soup left from 2 days ago. Thin soup. Meant to last 3 more meals. She looked at the pot, then at Caleb shivering on her floor, then at Ruth who seemed to be somewhere else entirely despite sitting right there. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She hung the pot over the flame and retrieved her last 2 clean bowls. Behind her, Caleb helped his grandmother sit against the wall. He stayed pressed against her side, one small hand gripping her sleeve as if afraid she might disappear again. The storm raged. The walls creaked. And Eleanor ladled soup she couldn't afford to give into bowls for strangers she'd never met. The soup steamed in the bowls. Eleanor placed them carefully in Caleb's hands, watching as he held one to his grandmother's lips. Ruth stared at the liquid as if she'd never seen food before, but her hands rose mechanically when Caleb guided them. She drank. Eleanor's daughter slipped from the bed and stood beside her mother, saying nothing. Just watching. The girl understood scarcity. She understood what it meant when the soup pot came out between meals. Caleb ate in gulps, pausing only to make sure Ruth was still drinking. When he finished, he set the bowl down and wiped his mouth with a sleeve already crusted with dust. "Thank you," he said. His voice was steadier now. "We got lost." Eleanor sat on the floor across from him, her back against the door. "Lost from where?" "Our ranch." Caleb looked at Ruth, who had stopped drinking and was now examining her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "We went for a walk. Grandmother likes to walk in the evenings." But then she didn't remember which way was home, and the storm came, and his voice broke. He was 7 years old, maybe 8. Too young to be responsible for an adult who couldn't remember her own name. "You did well to find shelter," Eleanor said. "I saw your light." Caleb's eyes met hers. "I almost didn't knock. I thought," he stopped. Eleanor waited. "I thought you might not let us in. Grandmother can be difficult. People don't like it when she gets confused." Something in Eleanor's chest tightened. She thought of her own children, what they might become if she wasn't there to protect them. Who would take them in? Who would give them soup they couldn't spare? "You're welcome here tonight," she said. "The storm will pass. Morning will come." Caleb nodded, but his expression shifted. "Became careful. Someone will be looking for us. My father. He'll have men out searching as soon as the dust clears. Your father will be relieved to find you safe." "Yes, ma'am." Caleb's fingers twisted in his lap. "His name is Walter Granger." The room seemed to contract. Eleanor's daughter drew a sharp breath. Even at 9 years old, she knew that name. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Eleanor kept her face still. "I see. You know him?" Caleb asked. "I know of him." Eleanor's voice came out calmer than she felt. "Everyone does. Walter Granger. The man who owned half the mines in the territory. Who'd bought up ranch land while families starved during the drought. Who rode through Dust Haven twice a year in a coach with armed riders and never stopped. Whose wealth was so vast it had become its own kind of weather, something that shaped the landscape whether you wanted it to or not. And she'd just fed his mother her last soup." Caleb watched her with those sharp eyes. "He's not, people think he's hard. But he's only hard because he has to be. After my mother died, the boy stopped. Swallowed. He tries." Ruth made a soft sound. Her head had tilted back against the wall, and her eyes were closing. Caleb shifted closer to her, tucking himself under her arm. "Sleep," Eleanor said. "Both of you. Morning will be soon enough for worry." But she didn't sleep. She sat with her back against the door and listened to the storm tear at Dust Haven. Her children had returned to bed. Caleb's breathing had evened out, his small body finally relaxed. Ruth's confusion had given way to an exhausted peace. And Eleanor thought about the morning. About riders appearing on the horizon. About a man whose generosity was legendary but whose mercy was not. About what it meant to have saved the family of the most powerful man in the territory. Outside, the wind screamed louder. Dawn came gray and silent. The storm had passed sometime in the deepest hours, leaving behind a world transformed. Eleanor opened her door to find Dust Haven buried under inches of fine dirt. Drifts pressed against walls. The main road had disappeared entirely, replaced by smooth waves of earth that made the settlement look like something drowned. Behind her, Caleb stirred. Ruth remained asleep, her breathing steady, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been during the night's confusion. Eleanor stepped onto her porch. The air tasted of minerals and distance. To the east, the sun climbed without warmth, a pale disk behind lingering dust. Nothing moved in the settlement. Every door stayed closed. Windows remained shuttered. Dust Haven had learned long ago how to wait out the aftermath. Then she heard them. Horses. Multiple. Coming fast. Eleanor's hand found the porch rail. She didn't move from her doorway as the riders appeared at the far end of what used to be the road. 6 men. No, 7. They rode in formation, deliberately, scanning every building. The man in front wore a long dark coat despite the morning heat beginning to build. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the quality of the fabric, the way it moved like water instead of cloth. His horse was black, massive, bred for endurance rather than speed. Walter Granger. He saw her porch. Saw her standing there. His hand came up, and the riders stopped as one. Caleb appeared at Eleanor's side. "Father." The word carried across the buried street. Walter dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. He covered the distance in long strides, his boots cutting clean lines through the dust. "Caleb." He reached the porch and dropped to one knee, eye level with his son. His hands gripped the boy's shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No, sir. This lady helped us. She gave us soup and—" "Where's your grandmother?" "Inside. Sleeping. She got confused again, but she's all right now." Walter's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they moved to Eleanor. She met his gaze and found something unexpected there, not anger or suspicion, but a fatigue so deep it had become permanent. "Thank you." He stood, and Eleanor realized he was taller than she'd imagined. "May I?" She stepped aside. Walter entered her home, his presence immediately making the small space feel smaller. He crossed to where Ruth slept and knelt beside her. His hand touched her face with a gentleness that didn't match his reputation. "Mother," he said softly. Ruth's eyes opened. They wandered, unfocused, then found his face. "Walter. When did you arrive?" "Just now." "Have you eaten?" "You work too much. You never eat properly." "I'll eat soon." He helped her stand, supporting her weight easily. Ruth leaned against him, still half asleep, murmuring something about breakfast preparations. Two of the ranch hands had followed Walter inside. They moved to assist Ruth, flanking her carefully as they guided her toward the door. Walter watched them take her outside before turning back to Eleanor. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather wallet. "Name your price." "There's no price." "Mrs. Briggs." "Eleanor Briggs." "Mrs. Briggs. You provided shelter and sustenance to my family during a dangerous storm. That deserves compensation." Eleanor's children had pressed themselves against the far wall. Her daughter's eyes were locked on the wallet in Walter's hand, on the thickness of it, the promise it represented. "Kindness doesn't need a price," Eleanor said. Walter's hand paused. He looked at her as if she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. "Everyone has a price. Not for this." The silence stretched. Outside, one of the horses stamped. Somewhere in Dust Haven, a shutter creaked open, neighbors watching, always watching. Walter returned the wallet to his coat. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had. "I don't forget generosity, Mrs. Briggs." He tipped his hat and walked out. Eleanor stood in her doorway and watched the riders disappear into the dust-covered distance, carrying Ruth and Caleb back toward a world Eleanor would never touch. Her daughter came and stood beside her. "Mama, did we do the right thing?" Eleanor put her arm around the girl's thin shoulders. "Yes," she said. And believed it. For days passed like any others. Eleanor mended shirts. Her children stretched thin meals thinner. Dust Haven swept itself clean and forgot the storm had ever come. But Eleanor didn't forget. She found herself pausing at odd moments, needle suspended mid-stitch, hands frozen in dishwater, thinking about Caleb's sharp eyes and Ruth's confused smile. About Walter Granger kneeling beside his mother with a tenderness the territory never spoke of. On the fourth day, she was hanging washing when she heard the wagon. Not unusual. Wagons came through Dust Haven weekly, carrying supplies to the mines or taking ore back to Iron Bluff. But this wagon turned off the main road. Came directly toward her home. Eleanor lowered the shirt in her hands. Two men sat on the wagon bench, neither of them dressed like merchants. Their clothes were too clean, too well-fitted. Ranch hands. And the wagon behind them was loaded with crates. They stopped in front of her house. The driver climbed down and removed his hat. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs? Yes. We have a delivery for you, ma'am. Eleanor's daughter appeared in the doorway. Her son peered around her shoulder. A delivery? There must be some mistake, Eleanor said. No mistake, ma'am. If you'll just sign here. But the second man was already unloading. He lifted the first crate with practiced ease and carried it to the porch. Then another. And another. Eleanor watched, frozen, as her porch filled with wooden boxes. Flour sacks stacked 3 high. Burlap bags that smelled of coffee and sugar. Wrapped packages of dried beef. Bolts of fabric in colors she hadn't seen in years. Candles bundled in dozens. Jars of preserves catching sunlight. And finally, 2 men struggling with something large and iron and impossible. A stove. New. Black metal gleaming. With an oven door that closed properly and burners that sat level. Eleanor's son made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. The driver held out an envelope. This came with the delivery, ma'am. Eleanor took it with numb fingers. The paper was heavy, expensive. Her name was written across the front in precise script. She broke the seal. The letter inside was brief. Mrs. Briggs. You may not believe in debts, but I do. Kindness offered without expectation deserves recognition without refusal. Consider this the start. Walter Granger. Eleanor read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. Ma'am. The driver was waiting. Where would you like the stove? She looked at her children. Her daughter had opened one of the crates and was staring at the contents, real flour, white and fine, enough to last months. Her son had found the dried beef and was holding a package as it might vanish. Inside, Eleanor heard herself say, by the east wall. The men worked efficiently. They installed the stove, checked the flue, and demonstrated the oven door. They stacked the crates inside, arranged the supplies with care, and answered Eleanor's daughter's whispered questions about the fabric with unexpected patience. When they finished, the driver tipped his hat. Good day to you, ma'am. Mr. Granger says if you need anything else, just send word to the ranch. Then they were gone. The wagon rolled away. And Eleanor stood in her transformed home, surrounded by more food and supplies than she'd seen in 2 years. Her children hadn't moved. They stared at the abundance as it might attack them. Eleanor sank into her chair. The letter was still in her hand. Consider this the start. The start of what? Outside, she heard voices. Neighbors emerging from their homes, drawn by the spectacle of the wagon, the obvious wealth of the delivery. She heard her name spoken. Heard speculation. Heard judgment wrapped in curiosity wrapped in envy. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway without knocking. Her eyes swept the room. Well, she said. Aren't you fortunate? The word hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and said nothing at all. That night, Eleanor's children ate until their stomachs hurt. She made real bread, flour and water, and salt transformed by the new stove's even heat into something golden and whole. The smell filled the house, spilled out into Dust Haven's evening air, and announced itself like a bell. Her son ate 3 pieces. Her daughter is 4. They moved slowly at first, as if the food might be taken away, then faster, making up for months of deprivation in a single meal. Eleanor watched them and felt something crack open in her chest. Relief. Gratitude. And underneath it all, a creeping dread she couldn't name. The visitors started the next morning. Mrs. Patterson came first, carrying nothing, offering no greeting. She walked through Eleanor's home as if inventorying it. Touched the new stove. Examined the fabric bolts. Counted the flour sacks with her eyes. You must have made quite an impression, she said. Eleanor kneaded dough and didn't answer. People will talk, you know. A widow accepting gifts from a man like Walter Granger. I didn't accept anything. It was delivered. You could have sent it back. Eleanor's hands stilled in the dough. She looked at Mrs. Patterson, at her tight mouth and hungry eyes. Would you have sent it back? Mrs. Patterson left without answering. Others came throughout the day. Women who'd never spoken to Eleanor before suddenly found reasons to knock on her door. They brought small items, a cracked cup, a torn apron, and asked if she might mend them. Their eyes roamed while they talked, taking in every detail, calculating worth. Some were genuinely kind. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house squeezed Eleanor's hand and said, "You deserved something good." But even her kindness carried weight, as if goodness was a limited resource that Eleanor had somehow claimed more than her share of. By evening, Eleanor felt scraped hollow. Her daughter helped prepare supper, real supper, with beef and vegetables and fresh bread. The girl worked quietly, but Eleanor caught her glancing at the door, flinching at every sound from outside. "Are people angry at us?" she asked finally. Eleanor set down her knife. "No, sweetheart." Mrs. Patterson looked angry. "Mrs. Patterson is." Eleanor searched for words. "Some people have been hungry so long they've forgotten how to be happy for others." Her son spoke from where he sat on the floor, carefully folding fabric scraps Eleanor had given him. "Is Mr. Granger going to come back?" "I don't know." "Do you want him to?" Eleanor looked at her son, 8 years old and already learning to read the dangerous currents between adults. "I want you both to eat well and sleep warm. That's what I want." But that night, after her children slept, Eleanor sat at her new stove and reread Walter's letter. Consider this the start. The start of obligation. Of debt. Of being known by someone whose power could reshape her life without her consent. She'd survived 2 years by being invisible. By making herself small enough that misfortune might overlook her. By expecting nothing and asking for less. And now this. Abundance she hadn't requested. Attention she hadn't sought. The entire territory was watching to see what she would do next. Eleanor thought about returning it all. Loading the wagon herself if she had to, driving to Granger's ranch, leaving everything at his gate with a note, "Thank you, but no." But then she looked at her sleeping children. At their faces, no longer pinched with hunger. At their bodies, finally relaxed in sleep instead of twisted by empty bellies. She couldn't take that from them. Not for pride. Not even for safety. So Eleanor folded the letter and placed it in the small tin where she kept her husband's wedding ring and the deed to this failing house. She banked the coals in her new stove. She checked the locks on doors that had never kept anyone out before but somehow mattered more now. And she lay awake, wondering what price Walter Granger would eventually name for gifts he claimed weren't debts. Outside, Dust Haven whispered her name into the darkness. 2 weeks passed before he returned. Eleanor was teaching her daughter to work the new fabric, how to cut pattern pieces, how to align the grain, when she saw him through the window. Alone this time. No ranch hands. No show of force. Just one man on a black horse, riding slowly down what passed for Dust Haven's main street. She stood. Her hands smoothed her apron automatically, a gesture she immediately regretted. Why should she prepare herself for him? But her heart was hammering. Walter dismounted outside her fence. He stood for a moment, looking at her small house as if memorizing it, then removed his hat and approached the door. Eleanor opened it before he could knock. "Mr. Granger." "Mrs. Briggs." He held his hat in both hands. "May I speak with you?" She stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her. Her children didn't need to hear this conversation. Whatever this was. "I wanted to apologize," Walter said. Eleanor blinked. "For what?" "For my manner. When I collected my son and mother. I was." He paused, and she saw him searching for words. "Relief makes me curt. I didn't thank you properly. You sent half a store's worth of supplies. I'd say that was thanks enough. Something flickered across his face. Too much. I don't know what it was. Walter nodded slowly. He looked older in the morning light, older than she'd realized. 40, perhaps. Maybe 45. Lines around his eyes from squinting at horizons. Gray threading through his dark hair. My mother spoke about you, he said. After we got home. She had one of her clear spells, they're rare now. But she remembered your kindness. Described you with perfect clarity. Said you gave without hesitation. He met Eleanor's eyes. She asked me to tell you that you have a good heart. Eleanor's throat tightened. How is she? Resting. Confused again, mostly. But she ate well that day. Asked about the kind woman who'd given her soup. Walter's voice softened. She hasn't asked about much of anything in months. The silence between them felt different now. Less like confrontation. More like two people standing in the ruins of something and trying to decide what could be salvaged. I have something for you, Walter said. He reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded document. Not a gift. A proposal. Eleanor took the paper but didn't open it. What kind of proposal? There's a building in Iron Bluff. On the main street. Been empty for 6 months since the previous tenant left. It was a seamstress shop. He gestured toward her hands, toward the calluses and needle scars that marked her trade. Caleb mentioned you so. Said he saw shirts waiting for repair. I mend clothes for neighbors. It's not. It could be more. Walter's voice was steady, factual. Iron Bluff needs a seamstress. The nearest one is 2 days' ride. You have the skill. I have the building. Eleanor unfolded the document. It was a lease agreement. Rent-free for 1 year. Supplies and equipment provided. Her name already written in. Why? She asked. Because you gave without expecting return. Let me do the same. This isn't the same. This is, Eleanor stopped. This was a future. A real one. Not survival, but possibility. 1 year, Walter said. If it fails, you owe nothing. If it succeeds, we negotiate fair terms. Not charity, Mrs. Briggs. Investment. Eleanor looked at the document. At her small house behind her. At Dust Haven, where she would always be the widow who took handouts from Walter Granger. Or she could be the woman who built something. There's another reason, Walter said quietly. My son hasn't stopped talking about you. About your courage in the storm. He asked if you were all right, if your children had enough to eat. He paused. I wanted to make sure the answer was yes. Eleanor met his eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. I need time to think, she said. Of course. Walter replaced his hat. The offer stands as long as you need. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Eleanor on her porch with a contract that weighed less than paper and more than anything she'd ever held. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table for an hour, the contract spread before her like a map to an unknown country. Her daughter leaned against her shoulder, reading the words slowly. What does rent-free mean? It means we wouldn't have to pay to use the building. For a whole year. Yes. Her son crouched beside the table, tracing the signature line with one finger. Are you going to sign it, Mama? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She thought about her husband, how he'd worked himself to death in mines owned by men like Walter Granger. How she'd sworn never to be beholden to that kind of power again. But she also thought about Caleb's sharp eyes and Ruth's confused smile. About Walter kneeling beside his mother with such gentleness. About a man who could have sent money and considered his debt paid, but instead sent food his family could eat and fabric her hands could work. Yes, Eleanor said. I think I am. Her daughter squeezed her hand. Her son grinned. Eleanor found a pen, one of the new ones that had arrived with the supplies, and signed her name. The ink dried quickly in the morning heat. 3 days later, a wagon came. This time, Eleanor was ready. She'd packed what little they owned, said goodbye to the neighbors who'd been kind and ignored the ones who hadn't. Mrs. Chen had cried and promised to visit. Mrs. Patterson had watched from her window without waving. The wagon driver was the same man from before. He loaded their belongings with care, helped Eleanor's children onto the bench, and offered Eleanor his hand. Mr. Granger said to bring you straight to the shop, ma'am. Everything's been prepared. The ride to Iron Bluff took 4 hours. Eleanor watched Dust Haven disappear behind them, watched the settlement shrink until it was just another smudge on the horizon, easily missed, easily forgotten. Her children pressed against her sides. They didn't speak, but their eyes were wide, drinking in every new thing. Iron Bluff was bigger than Eleanor remembered. The main street was paved with wooden planks. Buildings stood 2 stories tall, their windows reflecting the afternoon sun. People moved with purpose, carrying packages, leading horses, calling greetings to one another. The wagon stopped in front of a narrow building with large front windows and a sign that read, Briggs Seamstress, Fine Tailoring and Repair. Eleanor stared at the sign. At her name painted in fresh letters. Mr. Granger had it made special, the driver said. Come see inside. The shop was perfect. Bright. Clean. A long work table stood near the windows for natural light. Shelves lined the walls, ready for fabric. A dress form waited in the corner like a patient customer. And in the back room, 2 beds, a small stove, a table with 4 chairs. A home and a business. Everything she needed to start again. Her children ran through the space, their footsteps echoing on wooden floors that didn't creak. Her daughter found the scissors, real ones, sharp and new, and held them like treasure. Her son discovered a jar of buttons and dumped them on the table, sorting them by color. Eleanor stood in the center of her new shop and felt the weight of 2 years lift from her shoulders. A knock at the door. She turned. Walter Granger stood in the doorway, hat in hand, the afternoon sun behind him. Is everything satisfactory? Eleanor wanted to thank him. Wanted to tell him what this meant, how it felt to have hope again. But the words caught in her throat. So instead she smiled. Truly smiled. For the first time in longer than she could remember. Yes, she said. It's perfect. Walter's expression shifted. Softened. He stepped forward and extended his hand. To new beginnings, Mrs. Briggs. Eleanor took his hand. His grip was warm, steady, honest. To new beginnings, she said. Outside, Iron Bluff moved through its ordinary day. But inside the shop with her name on the window, Eleanor Briggs stood with her children and a man who'd repaid kindness with respect, and for the first time since her husband died, she saw a future worth reaching for. The dust storm's wreckage was gone. The hunger was gone. The fear was gone. And in their place, hope rose like the sun over new territory, bright and unrelenting and finally hers. If Eleanor's story touched your heart, let us know in the comments which moment stood out to you most. Was it her bravery in the storm, her refusal to accept payment, or Walter's unexpected kindness? We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this tale of courage and second chances, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories from the Wild West. Until next time, may kindness find its way back to you.